Hello. Today we're going to be looking at the Ford and Carter presidencies. Our learning objectives are to explain the domestic issues facing both Ford and Carter. So first of all, we deal with Ford becoming presidency. As we saw in the previous lesson, Nixon was forced to resign due to the Watergate scandal. Yes, he could have not resigned, but he would have likely been impeached and most likely convicted and removed from office. So Nixon went ahead and resigned due to the Watergate scandal, and this brings Gerald Ford into the White House. And keep in mind that Ford originally was not even the vice president because Spiro Agnew, Nixon's original vice president, had to resign due to his own scandals. So Ford quite literally comes to the White House having not even been on a ticket as either a vice presidential nominee or a presidential nominee. So on August 9th, 1974, Gerald Ford was sworn in as the 38th President of the United States. On September 8th, he granted Richard Nixon a full pardon. And this becomes very controversial. His approval rating fell from 71% to 50% immediately. So he took a pretty hard hit for pardoning Nixon. Now looking at the impact of the Watergate scandal. The scandal added to a growing distrust of public officials. It led to the Federal Campaigns Act's amendments, which limited campaign contributions and set stricter election laws. The Ethics in Government Act, which required financial disclosure of government officials in all three branches, and to new FBI domestic security investigation guidelines, which restricted political intelligence gathering activities as well. With regards to economic issues, LBJ, or Lyndon Baines Johnson, had increased deficit spending to finance the war in Vietnam and to finance his Great Society programs without raising taxes. The increased government spending caused inflation or a sharp rise in consumer prices. Ford, like Nixon, had to deal with inflation. And we also began to have an economic crisis in the 1970s that largely was caused by the OPEC oil embargo. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, placed an embargo or a stopping of shipping of petroleum to countries that supported Israel. The United States is Israel's biggest supporter. And we're also the #1 oil consumer in the world. So the embargo caused the price of crude oil to quadruple by 1974 to $12 a barrel, which, by the way, would be cheap by today's standards. But what this does is it creates a real shortage of oil. You can't produce gasoline without oil. This leads to gas rationing. Gas had to be rationed, and in some locations you could only buy gas on even days if your license plate ended in an even number, or on odd days if your license plate ended in an odd number. Some other stations might have different flags they might put out. Green meant that they had gas available for all consumers. On a yellow day, it was only available for commercial vehicles, and the burden of proof really rested with the consumer to prove that they were using the vehicle for commercial purposes. And then on a red flag day, nobody could buy gas. So, and at this point in time, I remember being a young child and seeing horrendous lines at gas stations. I mean, vehicles wrapped for blocks of people waiting to buy gasoline when it was available because it wasn't such short supply. And obviously with that gas rationing, people had to plan ahead. I mean, for example, if you commute to work, you can't wait until you're almost out of gas and then just go conveniently find a gas station on your way because it may not be open. So you had to kind of plan ahead so you wouldn't run short. And we also experienced a very stagnant economy, which means the economy really wasn't growing. The loss of manufacturing jobs to foreign countries contributed to the stagnant economy. and resulting in a situation known as stagflation, which is really kind of the worst case scenario. Stagflation is where you have the combination of a stagnant economy, or an economy that's not growing, or maybe even in a recession, combined with a period of high inflation. And that really is the worst possible scenario. So as the economy slipped into what at the time had been the worst recession since the Great Depression, Ford tried to revive the economy with his Whip Inflation Now plan, but it failed. Ultimately, he came up with this nice little acronym, WIN, for Whip Inflation Now. The concept, I think, was really to kind of get people to buy into this and to hopefully get inflation under control. Ultimately, he didn't really have a very solid plan that proved to be very workable and wasn't able to bring inflation under control.